Couple of days before we're actually recording today on 22nd February. Don't know when we'll publish this. Couple of days before Google released this post about the concept of an AI co-scientist. Did you guys read that?
It's heard the news. Haven't seen the actual thing. Could you shed some light on it?
Pretty interesting stuff. It's almost like combining AI agentic approaches with game theory. Um, it sets up a swarm of agents basically to do research tasks like hypothesis development and like not so much about idea generation, but it tweaks your ideas and makes it better, and then it takes it to their logical conclusions and find and ranks which ideas are basically worth pursuing. So it's almost like a co-pilot for science, where it essentially gives you a filtered set of ideas to focus on once you have a general direction to move forward. um,
Hmm. I can imagine this is the like Google Scholar V2 basically, and they won't need to use that search engine anymore. Google Scholar was my friend, always been actually when it comes to finding research papers, doing literature reviews, or just fact checking things when I see things in the news.
So how does it actually co-pilot? So you're saying it has like an agentic approach. So does it help you? So you come up with like a general research goal and it just iterates through and creates different variations of your goal, different hypotheses to test. So like what aspect of the research pipeline is it specializing in? Is that clear from the release or is it just general? We can help speed up the rate at which you can do research.
I think there's a lot of detail they've actually given us. And let me share my screen. So basically, they're saying that they have these concepts of multiple agents: supervisor agents, generation agents, review agents, ranking agents, evolution agents, and a bunch of basically review agents on top of that, like a meta review agent. And essentially, what they're saying is using all these concepts is like each agent essentially acts as a role that is played almost by a human during the research process or even the pre-research process, right? So the grunt work of actually writing a research plan is the most annoying thing, which is, hey, does this research idea have legs? Can I actually write a project plan where I do some literature review, prove out that, hey, this actually makes sense pursuing stuff? And I think this gets the grunt work out of the way so that the scientists can focus on the science and not so much on project planning and figuring out which ideas to tackle if the end goal is a certain goal.
Hmm. Project plans go through a gateway. Well, if they need funding, uh, the grants, bodies, organizations that provide funding, they would definitely review these sort of things. Um, yeah, I'm curious as to probably how it's set up, how it frames it, probably along those lines.
And how long, again, a bit ignorant in this space, but how long does like the whole grant process? So once you have a research idea or a research goal, iterating through creating your plan, how long does it typically take to get funding? I imagine it's probably not the fastest process.
Well, it depends on the grant body and how much it is that you're asking for. Um, it could be a few weeks, could be months, and the plans could simply be a single page, an abstract, or 3 pages. Like I remember, my colleague got like a $500,000 grant on a 3 page proposal, and yeah, he was just saying sometimes these sort of grants are much better than doing a startup. Like you just have 3 pages, and you already got $500,000 for your 4 years of research.
Wow. You just get a bunch of PhDs to go and explore your idea, actually do all the testing and everything. Because, yeah, I'm scrolling through Google's blog post, and they're comparing the conventional experimental pipeline, which in this example, I'm sure it's a little bit exaggerated, but it's saying, yeah, they kick off this process in 2013, and then by 2025, like in the conventional research uh, sort of research project or grant, then you would actually get the results like by 2025. So it'd be like a 12-year period. Whereas according to this, it can speed up that whole pipeline of going from idea, getting everything in place, actually conducting some of the experimentation, and then getting that done, it claims, in 2 days. So if you scroll further down in this document near the bottom, they do the comparison between the two processes. There we go here. Conventional experimental pipeline versus AI co-science assisted. But I wonder what the impact of, say, you have a reputation as a PhD, you have reputation as, say, a professor at a university, and that reputation allows you to secure grants and secure, like, again, validation that the research that you want to do should be performed. I wonder what the impact on, like, kind of democratizing this.
100%. I wonder if there's any sort of democratization at all, because academia is very hierarchical. And the same person I mentioned that who got the $500,000 grant is because this was a prestigious, well-known professor who has that clout in their world, like enough. Well, the other page that they attach is the number of previous research they've done, the scaffold that they've done for the next iteration. Um, this won't have that unless you are bringing that in, and this is just handling the admin and the writing side of it. But yeah,
So
for sure.
so then basically, if you have the reputation, using a tool like this could speed up your iteration speed. But for like the general person, the blocker would still be securing grant money.
Yeah,
And then if you don't have that reputation, you can have all the best ideas, and you can piggyback off of AI, but you still won't be able to get the money to explore those ideas.
unless you crowdfund, there is such a thing. Um, you appeal to the public to get that. I've seen that, and I wonder how that catches on. But yeah,
I think
you
this is this is interesting, right? Because on one side, it's helping you secure funding, so it'll help the people who are already securing funding secure funding faster, essentially. But on the other side, it's almost like a reality check when you're starting to do your planning, so you can actually come up with a different or a better plan than you originally set out to. And I think there's this two-way thing, right? One is actually helping the funding, but the other thing is actually helping you conduct your research more directionally, efficiently.
this is after assume once you got the grant already, and for sure it's laid everything out, and in terms of the methods, etc., practicalities.
Because for
Um,
me, this graph is quite interesting, right? Because this is basically the ELO, or almost as if pitting the AI co-scientist against pure human systems. And you can see the human systems basically like cap out over here at an ELO of 1250.
what is the unit of elo?
ELO is a ranking system, so it goes like higher means better,
Hmm.
and it basically doesn't have a cap. I think usually like it goes up to 2500, 2600. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Daniel. Um,
I mean, I
Similar
think
to
about
chess,
chess,
essentially.
yeah,
Yeah.
chess elo or these LLM arenas. So based off of which one do you prefer, win loss ratio, then your elo increases depending on the elo of your opponent, and then yeah, over time it increases, and you get this whole stack rank of how people have performed in a certain task. And then I guess this is measuring. I still Can you break down your understanding of this graph? I'm still trying to figure out what it's saying. I can see it's going up and to the right, but what does that actually mean?
So, my understanding is this x-axis you're seeing is the time bucket, as in how much time you're willing to spend on inference time compute. So, this is showing basically how much, like, if I put in more energy, cost, and time on the inference time scaling aspect of these models, can I basically get better? So this is basically showing that the AI co-scientist approach that Gemini came up with uh, is actually scalable. So basically, if they get better models or if they have more compute available during inference time, they're only going to get better. And this is what this graph is showing us. Like, one, it's showing that it's, hey, better than humans. But the other thing it's showing us is like it's actually growing with more time given to it.
Okay, and the ELO is measuring the specific research goals and whether for a specific topic those research goals are better. And they're saying the more time spent, the more inference time spent, they can get better outcomes and better research goals.
Yeah, this is interesting. They say automated ELO metric. So I wonder how they're ranking, how they're choosing preference of, hey, this is generated by AI, this is generated by a human. How is which one's actually better? I think they're also using an agentic system to rank it. So take everything with a pinch of salt. There's a level of certainty to these metrics, but I wouldn't take this as fact, let's say. Just to go back over there to the inference time scaling, right? So this is the paradigm that's developing in all these um, new kinds of models, especially the reasoning models. You have OpenAI come out with deep research. You have Perplexity with deep research. You have something similar for DeepSeek, and you have Notebook LM, but in the Google Gemini world. And all of these are basically saying, hey, if I spend more time introducing more agents or characters in my final in in my literature review or my search for the right answer, am I going to get better rather than just ask the LLM spitting out results? Can I actually role play my answer through multiple perspectives and improve it? And this basically is an approach that's now almost pervading through various like verticals, and this vertical is the science vertical, right? And this is basically showing that, hey, I have all these agents basically role playing, and if I put enough time and compute in these interactions between the agents, can I actually get a better answer? And essentially this blog post is saying, hey, you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually comparing AI to the general AI, um, as in like ChatGPT and all LLMs, and it's saying it's producing better goals. It's not necessarily, um, yeah, putting it against a human at this point here. There, it's kind of only it's probably assumed already that's better. It's comparing AI to AI.
Mm.
It's trying to differentiate itself from other AI products.
So you think the human expert is just a baseline that they picked at 1250?
Yeah, and then so it's comparing
Okay.
with the like Gemini. It's comparing it to itself. Yeah, well, not itself, the other generalized LLM.
Yeah, but I can see like so much time saving, like because what as we're chatting just before the podcast about the whole process of literature review and how much time, how time consuming that task can be, like being able to offload a lot of literature review to an AI agent that instead of taking say 30 minutes to an hour to multiple hours reading a paper, distilling it down, breaking it down so you have your own understanding and offloading that whole task to a swarm of AI agents and being able to pull out the key pieces that are relevant to whatever research goal you're investigating. That would be a massive time saver.
Yep. Could you scroll back up to the agents again, where it's showing the conversations that's having, and then the ranking. I wonder how it
Is it
figures out here. The ranking agent. That is a big one, I think. And then the evolution agent. I say this is because scientists, when they do their literature review, they go to websites like Web of Science and they rely on indexes of, well, the impact factor. That's the actual name of the paper, the index on the papers in terms of the influence or how much of a breakthrough it has, etc. And then they rank it according to that. And I wonder if it came up with its own index, like whole companies, like the company I used to work for, Claravit, relies on this as their bread and butter, which is they have armies of scientists reading papers and just ranking them and based on that. And it's not just like um, the social media influence; it's actual scientific breakthrough of that paper, and it's deciphered like that, quite manually, in fact.
This isn't one of those metrics as well, like how many times has a paper been referenced in other papers? So kind
Yep,
of like your
exactly.
backlinks
Yep,
concept. So if you have a piece of scientific research that is then in the next 5 years been referenced so many times, and that increases your rank. And I'm sure there's many other ways to measure the impact of a paper.
yep. And yeah, there's whole conversations about how it's done, the utility of it, because it could be referenced, but it could be referenced in a way that it's debunking it, for example. And yeah, we always go back to how a paper becomes quite influential because it has a name of a very famous professor that's in that field, for example, and that also adds to it, to the impact factor.
Yeah, this is interesting. This also comes down to that initial, maybe initial conclusion that many people had that LLMs are quite interesting in being judges. Um, they're pretty good at it, surprisingly. So they might not be good at generating something, but they're quite good at saying that this is good and this is bad.
Yeah, it's quite
Uh,
interesting.
and I think that naturally puts them as a in a nice position to rank the output, um, and therefore you they so an LLM that's being a ranking agent becomes a natural filter and a good filter to this idea hypothesis generation. But it's quite interesting, right? So they gave an example where they're talking about a 10-year research potentially turning down into like a 2 year plus a 2 day research, 1 year plus a 2 day research. And they're basically saying that, hey, you have these ideas that you want to test, um, and then often you get sidetracked into validating that idea, or this side gig almost, or a mid idea. And in order to validate that, you conduct a lot of research, and then you get to a conclusion with which you can actually follow on to the next idea. And this basically gives you the quickest path to directly go into validating the series of ideas that would finally validate your final hypothesis.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
think this is the key thing, right? So it's giving you the shortest path to success, essentially.
Yeah, it's acting as a very I would say, like you say, a judge on, it knows what is the direct path. And I wonder how the how does it figure that out without actually conducting the experiments to move on to that this series of stages. It's quite interesting. And I wonder if this would end all, like, all those researches that you see on the news like that. It's like, why would anyone fund that type of research? Like, there's a PhD funded for just that. And sometimes I now I'm feeling if it doesn't do that anymore, then yeah, that would get rid of all the fun experiments of scientific research. Let's see what happens. Like,
So do you think that this will have general positive impact across all fields of research, or do you think that there's certain fields that would have bigger
Yes.
impact? Because looking at this paper, they're calling out what the development of CRISPR and looking at
Yep.
specific applications of that, of where it would be most suitable. Um, I feel maybe in biological sciences it would be super useful, but what about like theoretical physics and those other places where it's harder to design experiments and a lot more capital is required to prove some of the latest theories in that space? Like you
Yep.
need a large hadron collider to discover the Higgs boson, what, in 2012, and then you just need bigger and bigger particle colliders in order to do the experiments required. So are there specific fields of research where you think this would be more impactful, or just generally across the board?
I'm just thinking right now, there's inherent biases already to begin with on where the funding goes, and most of the funding already is in the world of biotech. This is where it's trending, and physics is losing that for a long time, ever since they invented cloning and they cloned the sheep, and since then, biology is just like dominating all the funding grants. So, I mean, you're right. Maybe you're kind of alluding to the possibility of the expense, the overhead of physical experiments, and that, yeah, there's, I guess, Google made and showed this blog first about biology because that's where all the research is at right now. Maybe if there's another breakthrough in physics, they would take the headlines and then they would focus the AI on that. Comes back to popularity of or trends as well, and I wonder if this will shape it.
I don't know. I think bio is definitely a field, right, where this gets deep into, especially drug discovery, um,
Yeah.
and especially as you're figuring out which experiments to run to validate a certain chemical or discover a certain chemical. I think this goes a long way in giving you the most feasible set of experiments to run or feasible set of research ideas to validate to get to that point where you have a discovered drug as fast as possible.
Mm,
And combine that with systems like AlphaFold 3 and stuff. Uh, you've got you've got a drug discovery machine at your hands, you know.
Yeah, but similarly, you've seen in like material science advancements, you can apply a similar approach, where say I want to find a material with a very unique set of properties, and then being able to use these sort of tools to basically come up with different hypotheses of like, oh, will this sort of technique result in this material with these properties, the different compositions of say like metals to have different properties. Like definitely material science, biology. There's definitely certain fields, but as we are saying, like maybe theoretical physics, it might be a bit more difficult to secure the funding there. Whereas there's like immediate applications for a new material, like with Microsoft's announcement earlier this week with their quantum computing breakthrough, which was based on a new material, a new phase of matter, which is super cool, allowing them to have a lot lower of an error rate in when they're building these quantum computers and have way more qubits, which is awesome.
Do you think that was somehow fueled by AI, that new
Um,
machine?
Again, I'm just reading headlines and have read a few articles about it. I'm not sure if it was driven by AI per se, but from what I've read, it was more driven by a sort of bet Microsoft had on this new material that paid off in the long term over the past 5 years. So instead of embedding in the existing technology stack for quantum computing, they looked at alternative materials, and then that allowed them to build a quantum computer with way more qubits, a lower error rate. Because again, not an expert here, but it was like you need for one qubit, you need like 100 supporting qubits, to make sure that there's no error in your understanding of its state. And then with this new material, they get a lot lower error rates. So I think it was like a factor of 10. Um, but yeah.
It's
This new
interesting, right?
material sorry, you're talking about where this is an existing element, right? It's not like a whole new element on the periodic table.
Let's do some quick deep research and pull up.
Because that would
You
be
do
a
some
great
deep
proposal,
research. You
right?
do some deep research, Daniel, while I do some Google searching. Uh, so I've got a BBC article up. So it's developed a new material, that's what they say, involving a topological conductor. So they've almost developed this new kind of category of materials, uh, because everyone wanted superconductors, which required to be like super cold.
Yep,
And
yep.
they say that basically here is a new thing, which is a topological conductor. It's not a superconductor, but it has its different things. They don't, okay, it's a new state of matter. Okay, I got to the main article through Google searching. So so this is Microsoft's original post from last week, and they basically say that they've created a new class of material, which is essentially a new state that they thought only existed in theory, but they've been able to produce it. And it's not a new element in the periodic table. It's a combination of existing elements.
Okay.
So indium arsenide and aluminium. Wait, aluminium or aluminum?
Depends on where you, what audience, American, British.
I think I'll screw it up either way. Okay, it still needs to be cooled to absolute zero. So I don't really understand why it's better than superconductors, but it is what it is. Microsoft says it's better. Let's accept
It's
it's
right
better.
there, the ease of measurement with traditional qubits versus using this material is you have like a way higher accuracy rate, which means that you can have more qubits in order to do your computations. So you can build bigger quantum computers using less
Okay,
components.
okay. And they say it unlocks the path to a million qubit computer.
Yeah, because the
That's
latest
interesting.
qubit, I think Google's quantum computer was only like 100 qubits or something. I might be completely wrong. Um,
And they've even published a roadmap. That's crazy. Okay, so this is a new thing, and I'm pretty sure they've used AI in some capacity. We don't know whether it's at the research process level or actually like idea validation level or simulation level to check out various materials. Like AlphaFold is essentially a simulation engine, so I don't know whether they use it like that or more about it, more in terms of agentic researchy planning. But very well could have done that.
Yeah. So yeah, I
Do they
just
mention
fact checked
AI anywhere?
myself. No, they haven't, but yeah, just fact checked myself. So Google's quantum computer is what 70 to 100 qubits, and then this is providing a scalable path to a million qubits, which is just a crazy amount of scale in such a short period of time. Because the Google's
Even
quantum
like
computer was announced what only last year or the past 5 years.
they've been working at it for almost 10 years, but the last year and the last 2 years have actually made it more realistic. And it's not been a pipe dream, it's more of a real thing now. Uh, s- Segueing slightly into a completely different direction, I just want to provide one more data point on uh, on how AI is actually helping various aspects of technology improvement. NVIDIA released this paper last year. It's called Chip Nemo. Nemo is their library that they have multiple LLMs packaged in for text, speech, etc. And they've basically released Chip Nemo, which uses LLMs to advance chip design. So this is the hockey stick you're talking about, right? This is the self-inflicting or self-empowering. cycle where AI is used to develop better chips that are used to develop bigger models that is used to develop better chips and go on and so on and so forth.
Is That's quite interesting. Where chip design, I would think it's not really a language orientated, um, I would say, let's say, format, and it's
Hmm.
able to figure that out.
So, to be honest, I've not gone too deep into Chip Nemo. I don't really know what it's designing. Um,
But
but
we can hypothesize, no? Like it would be around the actual architecture. So where do you put the different components in the
Yeah.
chip? So again, what you can have like a 3D chip structure. So if you stack certain components here and you cluster them in this point, like what efficiency can you get in terms of like the distance? Because right, you want as short connectors between the different components as possible to have as an efficient chip as possible. Because if you have your memory and and like the CPU part on completely different parts of the chip, when you're
Mhm.
scaling that, that can take that all of those inefficiencies can.
Yeah, that's what I meant. When okay, so when they use the term LLM, do they actually consider like the visual, the imagery as well? And what you're saying is, yeah, spatial awareness or spatial suggestions of chip design. That's what I'm alluding to.
So I think that might be coming, but I think what they have here is slightly more basic, which is an engineering assistant chatbot, an EDA tool script generation. So EDA is exploratory data analysis, and a bug summarization and analysis. So this is more at a meta level where a chip designer could use this as a co-pilot.
Yep, yep, yep.
I don't think it helps you automate the end-to-end chip design.
Okay.
But maybe it's got enough domain to understand that particular task. So it could do basic reviews of your chip design. Like
Mm,
if you upload an image of your design of that particular component, it might be able to reason and understand that. But it looks like they've trained it on like their documentation for chip design and on their internal like task management. So it doesn't look like a lot of um, understanding of the actual like connection between components, but it's more, hey, what did you think about this kind of design or not?
yeah, and I wonder if it comes up with any new designs that people didn't come up with before. Um, yeah,
Because you can see that sort of development in CAD, in the CAD world, when you're designing, say, a new car and you're trying to find what's the strongest. If I need this beam,
yeah,
a pillar, like what's the, if I optimized for weight reduction, keeping all the strength like properties that you're looking for, and you follow
Hmm.
like biological design, like some of these, again, this isn't a latest development, but I've seen that being used over the past like 10 years in CAD, where you can find some like novel ways to design materials like these pillars and stuff in order to reduce the weight as much as possible, but then also maintain the same strength properties.
mm,
So it's like that sort of innovation has existed for a while, and it's,
yeah,
yeah, just going to keep going. But I wonder how much of this is hype as well. Because again, maybe the wrong analogy, but the 5000 series NVIDIA GPUs, specifically when used for gaming and stuff, have not had the positive fanfare. They've actually had quite negative reviews, and the performance increases that they've had year on year, generation to generation, have been quite underwhelming. Um, so across the whole spectrum of like the 5090, 5080, all of these chips. So there are like touting different features. So like in frame generation, so frame generation is basically interpolating between two frames and generating frames in between. So that will artificially increase your frame rate. So they have new features like that. But if you're using a metric like, yeah, your frames per second and not using those features, there hasn't been the expected increase in performance. um, on the generational bump, like from generation to generation. So in the past, sometimes you can see like, yeah, 30% improvement generation to generation. But here, I think the improvement was close to like, yeah, 15, 20% on sampled games and stuff. So I'm wondering how much of an impact, maybe in like massive server applications and running ML models, there might have been more improvements. So I don't know if it's an optimization problem. But this generation, at least in tech news, if you're a Linus Tech Tips watcher or any one of the other tech YouTubers, not as positive reviews. And also, these chips are impossible to get your hands on because all the big companies are trying to fill up their server racks with the latest GPUs from NVIDIA. But yeah, so how much of this is like more hype than, again, trying to justify the massive valuation that is NVIDIA at the moment versus actual development?
Hmm. Um, so you're saying that they might have hit a actual plateau and they're struggling to increase in the the technology. I wonder, or the research that Prosh just showed. I wonder, is it being utilized just now? And so maybe it's the next generation, not this generation, but the next
Yeah.
generation is where we're going to see breakthroughs on that.
Because, yeah, for the past, with like Moore's Law, you can look back the past
Yep.
30 years, like transistors have just been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then now I believe they're at what, like the 4 nanometer process node. But the issue with that is you hit the limitations of quantum mechanics and you start having quantum tunneling. So you can't tell if your transistor is on or off. So that there's that limitation um, on chip level. But then it's like, how can you maybe use AI to come up with alternative methods to get around that? But now the whole trend is, instead of, yeah, having better chips, is just using more and more chips together
That's right.
and having your massive supercomputers with hundreds of thousands. Like you have the XAI's massive supercluster that they built, which was what, how many hundreds of thousands of
Uh,
H100 chips?
I think it was like 600,000, if I'm not
It's
mistaken.
insane.
Just crazy. Uh,
These chips
but
probably.
also, just on that, right? Like generally, design, especially chip design, has been going in two directions, right? Always like TikTok, Intel coined that word. So on one cycle, they make an advancement into the actual nanometer scale uh, processing, and in another cycle, they actually consolidate the components and make them more efficient. So I think we're going to be in an extended talk cycle where it's going to be consolidation, removing bottlenecks, and that's where I think like AI or something else can help. Because as you're stacking up more chips, other things become the bottleneck, like your memory, your network. How can you optimize for that? So now you're into this larger system design optimization rather than like chip optimization. And I think that's going. I don't think we've hit like plateaus over there. There's still a lot that can be done over there. Um, and then maybe in a few years we discover like light-based compute or something like that, and we are back in the tick cycle.
Isn't the TikTok typically referring to like the hardware software cycle where you get like a big advancement in a chip and then no one knows how to use that power, and then there's all this software advancement that takes place? But then in the analogy that you're doing, it's a hardware sort of cycle. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's, I feel like, yeah, that's definitely a direction, because now we have an application which needs endless compute, these
Hmm.
LLMs. So it's like you need to optimize the engineering of these massive data centers and servers and making sure that they're all working seamlessly together for your application.
Yeah, so Intel's TikTok basically is on one generation they introduce a new architecture, and the next generation they stick with the same architecture, and they improve like the chip slightly, and then they improve the software stack of it on top of
Hmm.
that as well. So it's essentially one generation you're moving forward, in another generation you're building the stack and
Hmm.
optimizing the processes for it, both at a hardware level and a software level. And yeah, I think we're going to be in this extended consolidation phase. um, just because now that chips are kind of difficult to make smaller, there's more investment that needs to happen everywhere outside the chip,
Mm-hmm.
especially in terms of like idea and stuff. Anyway, going back to science, right? We digressed slightly. uh, Going back to science, we're in fun times, right? Would you
I
like science has changed its way it's been researched over the last 100 years dramatically? Wouldn't you guys say that?
Yes.
I
um,
I hesitate. Well,
you
maybe
hesitate.
I
I'm
hesitate.
curious. Why do you hesitate?
Well, as usual, just bringing this back to politics and Trump and cutting funding, and that is
Wait, James, aren't we bringing it back to dating? Isn't that the thing that we always bring it back
not dating, but when it comes to
to?
scientific research, this one is well, it could quickly go into that if we're talking about the research of relationships, which could be spanning very specific words in the grants. Yeah, so yeah, what Raj is alluding to is this scientific breakthroughs that are happening, in linear form, and then we're observing whether there is a hockey stick type of trend with AI on top. Um, what I'm really thinking about is the geopolitics of scientific research and where the breakthroughs are happening. How Western cultures dominate, and now potentially there's other countries that are producing more PhDs or making more breakthroughs, and we wonder why that is. And there's a possibility, there's a lot of influences, mainly the politics of where the funding comes from, and also where there was an interesting point where countries that were enriched by oil and gas, right? Since we're switching out of it, it's now countries that are able to benefit from renewables are able to have that much more commodities or resources to fund science as well, and you'll see more research being developed there, perhaps. Um, yeah, those are the thoughts when I thought of when it comes to the progress of scientific research. Maybe it's because I was a PhD and just I would always find like funding is such a big barrier, big first step to need to achieve before you can actually do the research.
It's funny, right? Like democratizing research or democratizing science doesn't actually mean democratizing science. It just means that the rich can start doing way more, and which means that the differential between like countries that are actively funding certain streams of research and the countries that are not actively funding those streams of research increases. And this puts things into perspective. But my curiosity over there is, does AI actually play a part in that, or it's just a geopolitical thing where this is always the trend and this is always going to be the trend for the
Yeah.
next few
I'm
years?
trying to think of if there's any like tangible examples of where some specific type of research doesn't need as much funding, and with a tool like Google's available to anyone, where if you ask the right research question and have it iterate through, um, is there like a specific domain where you can take one of the hypotheses, test it on the very cheap, and have an immediate impact? Maybe an example might be in like plastics recycling, for example, where recycling plastic has always been a challenge. And yes, the fossil fuel industry keeps on claiming that recycling is the responsibility of the consumer and so on. And again, we're all getting so many plastic products like pushed down our throats. But is there a way, like in third world countries, to basically on the cheap solve that problem. So I've seen like some advancements in enzymes that are able to degrade plastic back into its constituent parts. There's other ways of recycling it. So like with your more heat-based approach where you melt down the plastic, but you're only able to do that for a maximum of like 5, 6 times, would like one of these tools allow you to hypothesize different approaches, and basically, yeah, democratize like something that's more tangible, because we've been talking about like very like biological impact and biological research and like CRISPR and stuff. But in order to have an immediate impact on medicine, you need the whole medical industry and pharmaceutical industry. Whereas like these more smaller ideas that can have an immediate impact, I would like to think if you had this tool, you could go out and immediately have an impact. So I do think there are some applications of research which the rich will continue to exploit, and because you need capital, um, only the rich will benefit from it. Like I'm sure with like a new anti-aging approach, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. So like the normal person wouldn't be able to access that. But for something, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think in terms of domains or specific like areas of research which would have a more far-reaching impact than these very capital intensive like groundbreaking areas of research that we were talking about? Chip development, CRISPR, quantum computing, very expensive. But on the other end, are there like low what are the low hanging fruit of research which could have an impact?
There are existing. There's a whole documentary on this on what they call backyard scientists, just everyday
Mm.
people who take open access papers and trying to do the experiments literally in their sheds in their backyards, just to, for their own sake, find medical treatment that could replicate the ones that are quite prohibitively expensive for them, like a new type of insulin, for example, because that's very expensive for a very common disease. So they go and trying to figure out what's the alternative. Um, and you could order supplies, etc., that are available to the public and to create your experiments and actually produce your own type of drug. Um, the enzyme research that you mentioned on plastic recycling, um, yeah, I've seen it done by researchers. While Prash and I were working at Zenith, we were actually sponsoring a research group that is doing exactly that, finding new enzymes using AI. And this is what they do is they discover a organism that could actually digest a certain type of hard material, and then they see if they could change it so they could digest a different type of hard material, i.e., plastics. See if just by figuring out like what is the exact DNA combination that would do that, and then change it a bit with that's the AI aspect to make that modification. And then the other level of AI aspect is can we insert it back to um, another bacteria that could replicate this? Um, yeah, and that
Yep.
is done by one or two PhD students, and they they have I would think the actual hardware, the labware, is accessible in the thousands, but not tens of thousands, and it's quite achievable by a small group of people.
Hmm. Hmm. I have a slightly maybe larger perspective on global shift, geopolitics, and how these affect like certain research streams, right? So yes, you have these verticals that are being focused on by the countries that can basically afford those verticals, right? Countries, laboratories, etc. But that itself causes changes in like how certain countries collaborate with each other. Like CERN was a collaboration of European countries, and they decided to work together, CERN, the European Space Agency, etc., because they knew as one country they cannot keep up with certain advancements
Yep.
in science, and they need to group up as a team of countries. And you can see certain alliances develop over certain like verticals, right? So on one side you have the Solar Alliance, which is almost the global south, which is countries like Brazil, South Africa, many countries in Africa, India, Australia. They're all teaming up to basically fund and move solar research forward. So I think the nature of these kind of research fundings are going to be more fluid, where certain countries will partner with certain alliances to fund certain research, and that those alliances would be quite vertically specified. So on one side you might have the Solar Alliance, on other side you might have a lithium ion alliance, you might have these kind of very overlapping countries in a way funding certain research, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive. It's just, hey, this is the area of funding I need to do, and I'm going to do it. So that's one side of things, right? And the other side of things, as always, I feel that there are countries which push the boundary, or let's say research that pushes the boundary, and there's research that democratizes the boundary, let's say. So there's research that makes certain things more cost effective. And you can see that with like the space program in the US, which is NASA, and then like the space program in India, which is ISRO, with a hundredth or a thousandth of the budget of NASA, right? And this is possible only because NASA makes those breakthroughs and then shows that certain things are possible. And then countries like India can borrow certain ideas and then make them incredibly cheaper. And I think this disrupts things, right? Where you basically can do something at a hundredth or a thousandth of the cost, and then you can commoditize that, and that actively funds your future research programs as well. So uh, there's always a case for a disruptor to disrupt things, and it doesn't mean that today, because most of the money is going in this direction, it will continue to go in that direction. All it takes is one idea and one breakthrough, um, and one lateral thinking way of doing things that basically creates a new stream, a new vertical, where now a country which was in the back, behind the scenes, comes into the forefront. So I think, as always, this is going to always be in flux, and no one can like predict the next 100 years and say, hey, these are the ideas that this country is going to focus on, and therefore, they're always going to stay in the forefront. All it takes is one one bad, let's say, political term in the government, and everything could change.
That's it. I think where what you're alluding to, perhaps that, and also with the AI making it cost effective, or just scientific research making it cost effective in general, you'll find, and then the mentioning of accurate scientists, you'll find that potentially an interesting milestone would be a Nobel Prize winner in the science category of someone who's not backed by any academia or any institution. It's just some person on his own trying to just figure things out. We had this before with the lady who won the Nobel Prize for finding the cure for malaria, and it was just a lady who did not have any scientific background, and she just read books on her own in the library and conducted her treatments and experiments in her own home. And so, with the help of AI or just a reduction of cost, we might see more of these. And it would be the battle of ideas rather than the battle of who has the funding to source all these equipment. You mentioned that there's these collaborations that take place across different countries, and that's because funding has a ceiling from every government, and they need this. Like the Genome Project needs several countries, and the it's because, yeah, obviously scientists are very, well, I'm generalizing, of course, quite egocentric, and they want to make sure that they claim that prize that we discovered first. For them to succumb to actually collaborating with somebody, it's because of need. Um, I'm just stereotyping the Big Bang folks, like the
Mhm.
characters in that Sheldon, right? He's like he's like, no, my name has to be on the first, right? And things like that. And that's just the nature of, yeah, scientific culture. Um, but not everyone is like that, of course. But yeah, you might see more independents coming up with their own, and hopefully it could be just in any country, any region without any sort of restrictions. And that's what we hope for.
Do you think that these advancements, like with AI co-scientists, not only will impact the hard scientists, like the hard sciences, but also more of like the social sciences?
Yes.
Because what one of the advancements that I found quite interesting is the AI village experiment, where you have LLMs that simulate different personas, and you basically set up like a simulated game environment where all these different personas can interact with one another. And that seems like a very easy way to test like social hypotheses around like interaction of people. So I'm wondering how AI will help improve our understanding of, say, let's say economics, let's say maybe not anthropology, but sociology, psychology, and all these other fields of more soft sciences, which are studying people. Um,
I'm just on that, Daniel. Before we so let's park that for a second, right? So let's come back to that question because I think that question is quite interesting. Um, so seeing how AI would affect certain fields, let's maybe walk back 100 years and see the general trends that have happened in science, right, over the last roughly 100 years. And Daniel did this perplexity deep research thing right before this podcast, and it basically came up with this nice paradigm, right? You have these three phases, let's say, of how science was conducted. Daniel, do you want to give us a quick rundown of those three phases?
so yeah, I was saying like in the early 20th century, a lot of research was more isolated. So you would have a limited amount of data, and basically yeah, you would come up with your hypothesis and it would take years and years to iterate on an idea. And it depended a lot on individual geniuses, say your Einsteins, to come up with like theories um, in order to move the field forward. And then with the advent of computing in the 1950s, and you're able to collect more and more data. Like you can look later into say like the 1980s, all the way to like the early 2000s, where there's a lot more of like a data driven approach to science. So like with the discovery and hypothesizing the existence of say the Higgs boson, like millions and millions of experiments were needed to be conducted to prove its existence, and the concept of 5 sigma was needed to be that this is statistically relevant of an idea, or that this particle does exist. And we kind of have these phases of pre-computing to now the computing age of research and the advent of big data and requiring so much data in order to prove hypotheses. And now this like third stage of like AI assisted research, which can potentially be a paradigm shift. Um,
Yeah, let's summarize that, right? Three phases. First phase, let's say the classical model, right? The classical model of science was human intuition driven. So humans basically chose ideas based on their expertise to work on, and those were worked on. And then you had the digital acceleration era, which was till the 2020s. So basically, the first 2 decades of the 2000s, which was basically leveraging the internet, leveraging big data, leveraging massive amounts of compute, uh, basically everything to do with computer and storage to parallelize, right? A bunch of experiments so that you could do way more in a short period of human time. And now you have the new generation, which is the AI inflection point, basically, where AI is entering all streams of life, just like how computing entered all streams of life in the last 3 decades. AI is now entering all streams of life, where now AI co-assists experiments. Certain experiments, maybe in the future, could be conducted autonomously by AI. Certain validation of certain scientific ideas could happen in theory by simulation agents, uh, so that you filter down to only certain experiments that you have to conduct. So basically, at each stage, we are increasing, let's say, experimental efficiency in a way. So how many, how much useful result can you get in in a short period of human time, right? In a pure classical era, we had that was limited by human time essentially. The digital era was limited by the number of experiments. Can you pose your experiment as a parallelizable experiment that you could run multiple things at the same time? And now with AI, that becomes even simpler. Can you pose your idea? We'll figure out the parallelizable experiment. We'll figure out which ones are worth pursuing and which ones are not worth pursuing. And we'll figure out like the relevant simulations so that we can rank these experiments beforehand and then go forward and give the human basically a smaller subset of experiments to focus their human time on. So better use of human time essentially, right?
Yeah. One of the examples Perplexity gave, which is quite interesting, is in that well, again, earlier approach of research is like the Human Genome Project, right? Which what took over again to sequence a single genome required what 13 years and 2.7 billion dollars of investment. Whereas now,
Yeah.
with the tools that we have today, sequencing genomes is a lot less capital intensive, and you can achieve the same thing a lot quicker now. And it's like,
That's funny, right? Like, but the Human Genome Project was the necessary precondition to absorb the data that was required to train these models to
yeah,
now
exactly.
function better. So nothing is wasted. But also, like, me and James worked in a company before this together where they were basically working on laboratory automation, right, James? And these guys basically uh, created these um, cheap lab, like almost like a robotic arm essentially, which works very well in a laboratory setting with test tubes. So you could parallelize your experiments, and then they reduce the form factor that a homegrown research lab essentially, or a small research lab in a small institute could buy this and start running multiple experiments within a day, rather than, like a human would run one experiment, wait for the results, use those results, analyze it. So this is, I'm still talking about the digital era. I'm still talking about the pre-AI era, where you started seeing these trends essentially, where more things could be done in a short span. Anything you want to add over that, James? You're from the field of biology, so
So you've mentioned the hardware component, which requires the automation, which is robotics, is what would help make the actual experiments more efficient. So a simple I mean, pipetting takes time, and that requires, actual manually putting a little, every petri dish is an experiment, and then doing it by in a smaller form factor and also by larger multiples is what would help. A lot of the DNA or genomics type of laboratory is highly automated now, thanks to these robots. And they used to cost hundreds of thousands. Now it's just thousands, and that's because of the company that we work for has pushed that forefront. And so, yeah, it makes things much more affordable. You could afford more experiments, and it's automated, so you generate more data essentially. That would help push the next thing forward, the new research forward.
perfect, perfect. And now that we come to the AI inflection point, which is right now in current history, We can go back to that question you were posing, Daniel, about how AI would pervade through various parts. Was was that the question, or was it something else?
Yeah, I was looking at not only the hard sciences, which we were talking about, but also the impact on social sciences and what impact could we potentially see across the board. So I was talking about how in social sciences, like the different disciplines, how could something like a AI village simulation help test different personalities and sociological concepts versus in the field of psychology. Like, again, I can see these AI co-scientists being super helpful with developing all these different, similar to like any other field, coming up and refining hypotheses, um, ranking the ELO of the best, most promising research hypothesis and research goal in terms of impact and so on. Um, but yeah, just trying to run through the different fields and try to understand, yeah, will the impact be as pervasive across every field, or will it just be the hard scientists, chip development, like biochemistry, biology,
No,
and so on?
uh, I think there's something there for everything, right? Um, we actually touched upon this in a previous episode when we were doing some research on climate change. We found out that certain countries like Singapore and Netherlands, um, actually Amsterdam specifically, have their own digital twins of the entire city, and a lot of decisions are first simulated in the digital twin. Like it could be as simple as, should I remove a red light from here? How can I optimize the traffic in this neighborhood? Um, and all that is now run in simulations, and then they basically use that as a way to test an idea before actually rolling it out rather than testing in production. Essentially, they've created staging environments for ideas, right? And I think the same thing is happening even in the field of um, things like surveys, right? So there's a company one of my friends works in called Electric Twin, and essentially you could ask a question like, "Hey, I want to understand whether so this is a policy I'm willing to roll out. I want to understand how it impacts this particular set of population." And it let's say it's something about increasing the tax on potatoes, let's say, and you want to understand the breakdown of that according to vegetarians, non-vegetarians, vegans, and then within that maybe various ethnicities and their social standing. You could now specify that demographic in natural language, and you can say, hey, these are the percentages of populations that I want you to simulate. And it basically spins out a lot of AI agents um, to act as those personas in that particular subset of community, and then gives you a response based on what they think that person would give. And essentially, again, you're able to test ideas before, right? So I think there's a certain aspect, especially in this twinning, like whether it's social sciences, whether it's like city simulations, whether it's deep sciences like biology and stuff like that. Um, it essentially, I find that AI is helping us shortcut doing full simulations, and it's understanding systems in a more direct way rather than, so it's changing this approach where you need to run a full simulation. Instead it directly gives a prediction based on what it thinks a simulate based on knowledge, essentially, right? These are knowledge machines. So I think there is a space for almost every field here. I'm willing to be wrong though, if you guys have a different opinion.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be corrected.
Uh, with any new trend of simulations, there's always going to be a need, a demand for validation, experimental validation. And I think if we could start to see if AI can actually produce the classic social experiments that we had, and see if actually you could have an agent actually represent a human being that is highly varied, highly variable. Um, I just had a thought about how a recent reality TV game show called Beast Games is very much a social experiment, and I wonder if they could actually reproduce the thousand people who enter that game and generate some sort of similar results out of the outcome of that. And so then people could have confidence that a simulation conducted by agents actually is valid uh, outcome to show to the world like, yeah, this people can behave in this very similar manner. um, Although AI, as we know, and when they start conversing, etc., something simple as that, they create their own language and it's becoming almost non-human. And when they tested when they simulated an AI jet fighter, right, versus like a Top Gun, a literal Top Gun, um, they noticed there's some extreme differences in flight skills in or flight maneuvers. It's because AI doesn't value their life, and how they take a huge advantage over that human Top Gun is that they actually would maneuver them, position themselves right in front of the plane, as in they're willing to crash the plane into the other plane, and it gives the AI a bit more advantage because it doesn't have a sense of value of life. And so it goes beyond human. And so then again, we could set boundaries, of course, like put a goal there. Please value your own existence. And then, yeah, could, I think, could generate that. But just watch out for non human type behaviors.
Yeah, and on the topic of digital twins as well, like and all these behaviors and mapping them out, just thinking, yeah, it's crazy how cities have their own digital twins and you can simulate traffic lights, but then even like Nvidia's announcement earlier this year specifically for their robotics pipeline of having a digital twin for factories and using those as staging grounds to train and basically have simulations of robots like working um, like around a factory, mapping out all their paths and everything and simulating all those things before actually putting them into practice so that you can create all the synthetic data that you would need in order to train one of these robotic systems. And then, yeah, if they have the wrong goals associated, like, is the best path walking right through the person standing there in order to get to my objective? I don't value human life. So I'm just going to create like a pathway that to a human would be like nonsensical. Like why are you stepping over this person? And
The robots will win because of that.
we're Terminator scenario. But yeah,
I could see this quite highly desired in terms of workforce in the workplace, and how you know, Harvard Business Review always tried to conduct social experiments on how to make the workforce more efficient and yet be happy. And yeah, I could see that how they could do that. Um, you just have to set certain boundary conditions and certain KPIs related to that.
Awesome. James, just before continuing, could you increase your mic gain? I think it reduced over time for some reason.
Sorry, I'm just not speaking as close as, yeah.
Perfect, perfect. Um, yeah, it's going to come everywhere, right? So you have, but one clear thing is twinning. Twinning is going to, like, AI is definitely going to win in twinning. So either robotic simulations or factories or cities or the climate. We forgot about the climate. Weather patterns. Google released an interesting model a few weeks ago. Not a few weeks ago, a few months ago, saying that it was the best one in simulating the weather. Um, I don't know what else. Energy is another field where you could start seeing simulation actually help. Um,
yeah,
you've
grid
already
prediction.
started grid prediction, also fusion research. Um, so a lot of fusion research right now is benefiting from AI. Again, shortcutting its simulation path where they're able to run a couple of experiments, a couple of more valuable experiments each time rather than simulating everything. And you've already seen those breakthroughs in certain companies in Oxford and Cambridge where they've been able to achieve slightly larger. I forget what they call it in fusion, but basically the time where the fusion reaction occurs. That you can see ever since ChatGPT came out. That's also starting to go in an exponential scale, right? And then you're starting to see the world of computing that's affected by material science, and material science affected by things like AlphaFold out there, like AlphaFold 3. AlphaFold 2 was a like a protein folding engine. Essentially, it would tell you how a protein folds, and way better than AlphaFold 1, which was the same. AlphaFold 3 is almost like it has so much knowledge about the material world that it can be used to invent, um, like, not just proteins, but almost any chemical reaction you could simulate with AlphaFold 3. And there's one lab which is also spun off from Alphabet, not spun off, a subsidiary of Alphabet, spun off from DeepMind, called Isomorphic Labs, right? And Isomorphic Labs, also headed by the CEO of DeepMind, is essentially running this, taking the inventions of AlphaFold or AlphaFold 3 and actually bringing them to market, partnering with big pharma essentially to do that. So we're going to see some interesting things. I think it's going to you're going to start seeing that in like anti-aging. You're going to start seeing that in like resolving things like cancer and stuff like that, or improving resolution of things like cancer or diabetes. So the the interesting thing is, what does it mean for humanity where certain things that we couldn't take for granted are now taken for granted, like fixing cancer? Like, how does humanity cope with something like such power given to them?
Yeah, and also just on a completely different level, like we're thinking big picture problems, but with digital twins, imagine the democratization of this technology. You could have a digital twin of your own house, and you want to increase the efficiency of your own household. Like right now, you would have to have a consultant or someone come in, or you can do the
Mm.
analysis yourself, but you can have a digital twin of your own home, and improve efficiencies there. It's kind of dystopian as well, like simulating walking around your own home and like how can I have like the most efficient, like let's say insulation housing in the UK. This housing stock is extremely old. So like what sort of improvements you can have, some of the more cookie cutter solutions of increasing insulation, but being able to create a digital twin of your house and then identifying the exact areas which would be the most cost effective could be a huge advent. Um, People's individual commute times, their own pathing and journeying around like cities and stuff. I don't know. It's just this concept of a digital twin and then running these Monte Carlo simulations of like even your own path. If you had like your own digital twin of your own existence, which had all of the pre-existing conditions and like all of decisions that you've made so far, and you start recording all of that data to come up with like an effective simulation of yourself and then simulating different outcomes, like that is pretty dystopian. But do you see that sort of thing happening as well? Like,
I'm all for it. I'd rather, yeah, have a digital twin of myself, and so that I could go on vacay all the time.
that's the promise of AGI, no?
But
And that,
yes, I think that's where we are heading, right?
yeah,
We're heading to a world where we have more and more data points on ourselves, more and more data points about our home, more and more data points about the city and life and interactions, and we'll be able to reconstruct a more and more accurate model of ourselves and society
mm,
based on like evolutions in AI.
And should you own that data? Should a random company own that data, or should a government own that data? Like, what
so
sort of
this is
model would be most beneficial, do you think?
this is interesting, right? Because at least in the home, let's say home automation wars, I've been following this quite a bit on Reddit. And what's won out is like the open source kind of home automation. So you have Apple Home, you have Google Home, you have Amazon Alexa, you have various other tooling, but then there's this one solution called Home Assistant, where it's essentially you buy a small device and that device coordinates all your uh, all integrations with your home assistant, whether it's your lights, whether it's your temperature sensor, whether it's your garage door or the battery levels of your Tesla battery, etc. And this is the one that actually won out and the most popular one. And I think there's going to be a scenario where it's going to be the same to some extent. You own your data, but then society's data is owned by the country you're living in. It's going to be this weird kind of scenario where, like, your private data stays private, but any signals that you're emitting, let's say, in terms of social interaction, that becomes public. But then there's always going to be enterprises which offer certain benefits that people will be like, hey, I'm willing to forego my privacy for these benefits that I get, which could be like 100 GB on a Gmail inbox. Like essentially people are trading data with Google for freebies that they get from Google, right? And same thing with Facebook. Um, so like,
Yeah, these are of course enterprise, and it becomes proprietary. And I think Daniel should is alluding to going back to democratizing. Like, hopefully, there is no ownership of that, and at the same time, I think it would help keep things in balance if everyone has equal access to that data. And for that to happen requires the generosity of people. And to do that, I think since people are people, we need a government to organize that. But unfortunately, we know how efficient government is. And so it comes back down to open source communities and how they govern themselves and how they keep data open. And maybe the scientific communities, they're the ones who are able to publish quite generously to the public for free. Access. The papers that they do is, at least the ones that are open access, are free to use. So yeah, the our companies that we worked in relied on public DNA databases that are available. There are of course some licensed ones, but most of them were public, and that required the generosity of those collaborations, those genome sequences that were, yeah, funded by many groups of organizations that say we agreed to make this public. Um, yeah, it requires human generosity in the end for AI to survive because it.
so when you say human generosity, are you talking about like private data, like my body's health metrics, for example? Should I be publishing that?
Well, the having worked in this arena, the best middle ground is we have to keep it anonymous, and so there people are willing to share that because of the benefits that you get back. But if it's anonymous, then it's okay because the anonymity is what prevents, let's say, bad agents from capitalizing on that and using it against you. That's the thing. People are worried about that, but if you make it anonymous, then it
Yeah,
should.
but how anonymous is it really? Like you can remove your name and stuff, but your biomarkers might be very specific to your individual
Yeah, you
scenario.
got to make sure it's anonymous enough. Like, don't have all this sort, like, don't even have your DNA in there, but behaviors is what we're aiming for. So far, we've been discussing just a lot about human behavior, and hopefully, AI can actually, rather than be probabilistic, like you would likely behave this way. I'm hoping that it could actually come up with a fundamental rule. Um, Going back to the theoretical geniuses back we had back then. Like, I'm alluding to like Carl Jung in psychology. He's able to categorize, certain cognitive behaviors that are quite fundamental to us. We either make decisions based on feeling or based on logic, for example. Those are categories that can govern and provide a fundamental rule, and hence, would, I would say, help people understand people, rather than just like, oh, because AI said so.
So would these AI researchers been able to discover or theorize about concepts like the id and
I wonder. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thing. Or it can't, or maybe we found a limitation to it. Um, it's because they say, because inherently by nature the AI is just highly dependent on probabilities, right? What comes up, and what you was mentioned, human intuition, right? Can AI reproduce that? They can be very close to it, but can it come up with the actual pure intuition that humans are capable of? And that's, yeah, I guess time will tell on that front.
Small curveball over here. Does does AI need to reproduce human intuition?
That's a good point. I don't think, as if you're interested in just the outcome of it, might not. A numerical result is just good enough than a pure theoretical result that you generate out of it. As long as the outcome is the same or similar, I don't think there's a need. But
But
um, when it's just the innate nature of, maybe because of the schooling I had, like we have to understand the theory first before we do the practicals, right? And so we can understand why the practicals behave this way, and hence going back to that. Now we're just working on data, pure data. It's just all practical, not understanding the theory that goes behind, that governs it. But do we need theory? Is your question? Might not, unless it could lead us into trouble.
I think the way I'm looking at this right now, at least the current generation, is we're in the co-pilot generation, right? Where where AI is helping us do stuff, and it's not fully autonomous yet, or basically we don't trust AI to be fully autonomous yet. And in this co-pilot generation, I feel like the human does what human is best at, which is theoretizing, intuition, understanding whether this is a good path or a wrong path with a larger context in play, like a larger expert context in play. And the AI does what the AI is best at, which is like being dumb, more or less, being dumb, and trying out a lot of things, and essentially churning out a lot of grunt tasks, right? Uh, that that is right now, but that shift could start happening where the AI is more and more trusted, maybe a decade away from today, or maybe even a couple of years away from today. What happens then, I don't know. But at least for now, like I feel no need where the AI needs to replicate human intuition. And we got to see how, at least I feel like we need to settle in this new normal for a few years to understand this interplay between human and AI, see how humans adapt to it, right, with society and stuff, and then take the next leap forward. And maybe then intuition becomes important, or we deem that not to be important because humans have lost their sense of intuition because of
Yeah.
AI.
But to what extent as well are humans just fancy autocomplete if you take like a deterministic approach to like why we behave in a certain way? Like if you have certain chemicals and brain composition, how does that determine in your experiences? How does that all determine how you act? So this whole concept of like intuition is like based off of your own experience and what you've done before, and to what extent would we be able to simulate that in a large language model, let's say, or another model that has the same sort of inputs and outputs. Like, are we
You're
also
getting
just fancy autocomplete? And then it's maybe that's too philosophical. And then
you're
can
getting
we
into deep Buddhism territory.
It's
Because Buddhism actually talks about it, right? It says, hey, in a regular realm, if you're not actually keeping things in check, you are an autocomplete engine. You're responding to the signals you're given, whether this is sunlight, whether this is someone else talking, whether this is, so every thought or every thing that your brain is processing or your body is undergoing is a response to some outside interaction, unless you take the step back. And that's what Vipassana is all about, being the observer of your own body and stuff like that. So I think there are, and even that is not like scientifically backed, right? Being the observer. It's a concept, it's a meta simulation that we are doing within our autocomplete engine of detaching ourselves from the autocomplete engine, which is quite meta. Uh, so I think there'll be a part where AI can also do that, like it is an autocomplete engine within a non autocomplete engine within an autocomplete engine.
It's an interesting word that you use, scientifically backed. I think in the future would be AI backed. Like we're not talking about the actual science experiments anymore. It's all AI simulations. Um, Going back to Daniel's thought about nature versus nurture, which is the experience bit. How do you simulate nurture, which is highly variable because our environments are highly variable? Um, I think AI can actually start at the regular realm or the more nuances to it. It could actually start and perhaps build enough data point to actually compensate the different kinds of experiences a person can have. Um, like even then, those things can be categorized, or people are attempting to categorize it. Like the simple behaviors that you see, like the attachment styles, avoidant, right? And these are the results of what you experience as a childhood. Either you have a loving set of parents or a loving environment or not so loving. And those are, you know, types of flows that AI can pick up. And sure, it's simplistic now, but in the future, you know, with more data points, it could get the nuances down pretty well, I would assume. And then have a pure simulation of a person who's been through, these type of experiences. Because we respond, either binary to a certain situation, or or maybe up to four different ways of responding to it, but not necessarily infinite amount.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
it
we're finite.
you can also simulate like at a way faster rate than time, for example, right? So like imagine a system where you can simulate the entire lifetime of a person, and then you do that at scale. You simulate again. Now we're getting to like simulation hypothesis, like where you simulate like billions of people's life in a digital twin. And what can you learn from that? I don't
Mhm.
know,
It could be done, and it could be done. That's what I'm saying.
which is scary.
But also going back to that nurture versus nature question, right? And we put this onus, I think, on AI and LLMs right now to understand the nature versus nurture because they need to communicate in human form, basically English or any other language. These are human terminologies. Like this is the science we defined in our terminology to govern ourselves, right? I there's a thing about LLMs, right? Like like even in language we have subject, predicate, noun, word, and the last generation of NLP models, pre deep learning, were governed by these principles, like human taught principles, and they capped out. They couldn't get better after a point. And the only way you could get better is not define these rules and just feed it data, and it learns from data what the rules are. So if you go and ask an LLM right now about a subject and a predicate, it's able to answer, but it's emergent. Like it understands the rules for itself and it's able to reason about them. And I think the same thing will happen. Like right now, we are putting our laws, let's say, or our rules into how we evaluate these models. And the moment we start not doing that and allowing it to learn from data, it'll start seeing emergent phenomena. And maybe that doesn't synchronize well with what we consider as like an avoidant personality and stuff like that. Maybe it comes up with its own different categories, let's say, of people. Maybe it does a one up on Carl Jung. You never know, right? So, so I think right now we're limited by the fact that the way we evaluate these models are in language and not in
Yep.
action. Let's say.
Yep. I totally
So, so
agree.
the moment it gets into action, right, like runs factories, runs robotics and stuff like that, it might discover other underlying principles of humanity, and that could be useful for us as well.
going back to this recurring theme of humans being actually quite limited, our language is actually quite limited. If you study different languages, you find that countries, certain cultures emphasize their language towards something that they value, and they value different things. For example, Italians have, 50 ways of describing a flavor, which, English doesn't have that. It's just one or two words to describe. Um, and it's just reflective of the culture. And Japan has, different ways of addressing a person, right? And it has different meanings of how you address a person. And so it's just different focus. And again, it's finite. And I wonder if simply humans are quite simple people if you compare it to what AI can think of. Maybe there is no more complex Carl Jung. Maybe it's just Carl Jung and that's it. And then computers, AI will just again create their own language and then converse quite differently and then be actual like non-human and do things that we can't imagine because of our limitations ourselves.
Yeah. And actually, on the topic of language, we saw this article that was posted in our internal Slack a couple of months ago, where almost every different language in the human existence has a similar bit rate, that is, how much information they pass
Mm.
versus how fast they're spoken. So, some languages which have a lower, like, that are more information dense are spoken slower, and some languages which are like information not dense are spoken faster.
Oh, I don't want to be in
Anyway,
that country. It's poor
like
information, lots of it.
I actually prefer like, hey, you talk faster, carry less information in each word, because you don't want one word to just determine your future about something.
Well, that comes back to human intuition, right? You have to pick up other aspects, the context of it, and that one word can mean a lot, or it could mean very specific things. And because you could read other aspects, like the body language, where the context is, and that forms communication as well. And so, yeah, can you read that person? And it goes back to intuition. Um, so yeah, Japanese language is sometimes about reading the air. There's a phrase of that because they won't tell you exactly how it is. It's almost like informative speech. You got to just read it to perceive what they're trying to communicate to you. And it's their way of being polite at the same time being very direct and impolite by hiding behind the politeness. Um, and so yeah, language is yeah can take different forms.
Awesome, awesome. Now, just I think I think we covered a lot, right? We went from all the way from science into humans, into language, and back into humans. Um, just trying to maybe put this all together, or maybe just get a read on the room, right? I want to understand from you guys, are we in a hockey stick pattern? Do you think we are in a hockey stick pattern? Just for context, a hockey stick pattern is a trajectory where growth is flat for a while and just like exponentially grows, like takeoff happens after a certain point. And are we at that point where that takeoff is happening?
Are we at the inflection point, basically? Well, you can
Hmm.
never tell until you have that next data point.
Okay,
Because right,
let's rephrase it, right? Let's not ask like, are we the exact point? But what's your bet? Like, do you think we are seeing hockey stick growth?
well, if you look at a lot of the leaders in the AI, like AI space, you look at Sam Altman, right? The concept of fast versus slow takeoff. What is the most probable? That's kind of the question we're asking. Where if it isn't hockey stick style growth, that's like a slow takeoff, where advancements are more linear and they slowly stack one on top of the other, versus this concept of fast takeoff, where with AI co-scientists and all these advancements from Google and helping improve the research process, from the NVIDIA Nemo paper that you brought up earlier, Pras, of like how they're iterating on chip development and making that more and more efficient. I definitely feel like we have a high probability in being in that fast takeoff. just looking at the past week of developments that have come out. The fact that this concept of like deep research has been created by multiple different companies at the same time. So the ability to do this deep research, read hundreds of sources, and have it summarized and compiled into a single place, a task that would take days or weeks to do is now 30 to 40 to 60 seconds. You can do so much reading, and have very information dense results. I think just based off of that and based off of all the developments at the moment, we could possibly be entering this hockey stick type of growth at the moment. Where does it start? That's a whole different question. But yeah, definitely every day there's a new advancement in AI, and those advancements are spreading across other fields of research, from the hard sciences to the soft sciences to digital twins and so on. So yeah, definitely very exciting.
I'm gonna be
Mm.
very dark on this, and I agree that there would be a hockey stick in scientific discoveries, and for the thing is, once you have create newness, you're going to create uncertainties as well, and that freaks out the other community, which is the religious community or the conservative community of trying to maintain status quo, and hence just this is just the because of our conversation made me connect that thought. There is reaction to this, like they're scared of AI and hence they might repress it, where we've seen this in Copernicus, the Da Vinci, every new scientific discovery, there's always a group of people trying to stop it until they have acceptance and understanding, and it would go through this cycle. And hence, Trump removing certain keywords. Well, I'm hoping AI can figure out how to write an abstract for you that goes, get your funding approval by working around those keywords, right? um, and so this is what I assume. This is why we might have the huge backlash of conservatories, like, well, you know, just different groups in society trying to repress these sort of things because they're afraid of it.
Interesting. Interesting. I have a slightly maybe mixed take on this, right? So borrowing a little bit from Daniel and a little bit from James. I think my my understanding is we don't have the option for a slow takeoff. Um, I think we'll just run out of resources, energy, and we'll kill the planet if we do a slow takeoff. We cannot continue with linear scientific growth, the way I look at it. Otherwise, we are just self destruction. We're undergoing self destruction. So there's no option but to hard takeoff, in my opinion. And given that there are these these things happening, which is like one. So perplexity basically says you're having your combinatorial exploration, where you're doing a lot of experiments, you're having your cross domain synthesis, and you're having your automated experimentation, and combine that with the flywheel, which is the like the ingredient flywheel. Like, let's say your data, your chip evolution, and your hardware evolution, and the AI evolution is now in sync, where each one will contribute to an increase in the other one. I think if you combine the whole flywheel aspect of things with all these things that are emerging, where you're able to parallelize essentially a lot of thought, um, I think we're going to hit like, or we are in fast takeoff. There is this weird conspiracy theory thing that I read about a long time ago, which is like the omega points, and it basically says that in so omega points are where your society dramatically changes, like when the internet came out, when your printing press came out, when TV happened, when then big data happened, deep learning happened, AI happened, and your omega points are going to get closer and closer and closer. So like the jumps between going from one life changing discovery to the next life changing discovery is going to get shorter and shorter. And I feel we're at that point, like where in a single year you're starting to see like massive developments happen. And I think that's going to continue till a point where it's going to happen in a single day. And that's truly like fast takeoff. After that point, like it's just not going to matter because every day you're just going to start churning out new shit. And humans are going to be like, and like right now, the way I write code is I churn out code using Cursor AI. And like coding has not become a human time consuming activity anymore for me. And that's how invention is going to go, that's how science is going to go, and that's how like everything is going in that direction, I feel. But yeah, but that's
Unless
just me, so I'm
Nice.
optimist. I don't know the effect of this, but yeah, it is what it
unless
is.
there's a cataclysm, and then there's a
Oh yeah, we're
society
getting
ending
an
in a by
asteroid, right?
yeah. But hey, they did the DART mission however many years ago. And you just shoot a tiny rocket, and if we catch it enough years in advance, with a little bit of a change in momentum, can completely change the trajectory. So we're all
Nice.
good for that.
Too late, boy. uh, awesome, guys. On that note, do we need any closing thoughts, or were those our closing thoughts?
I think
Awesome,
that was fine. Nice.
awesome. Goodbye, folks. Thanks for listening in, the audience, whoever it was. Ciao, ciao.
See you next time.
Peace.
Awesome, dude.
It's a fun meandering conversation.